And being able to support them as humans, I think, is the bit that I enjoy. Yeah, 100%. You know, they're busy old days, right? And there's lots of people that they have to communicate with. Listen, we make it a priority from day one. Is probably one of the simplest things I can say. So as soon as somebody joins our program, no, it's not going to last forever, right? Most us normal folk go into careers in the hope that it is going to, right?
Hello, and thanks for tuning in today. This week's episode is brought to you in conjunction with Upskilled and their mini MBA. If you want to get the skills and knowledge to help move you forward without all of the big expense, then this mini MBA with Upskilled is the right way to go. Follow the link in the show notes and you can get $500 off. Helen, welcome to the show. Great to have you on here today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And I am quite intrigued about your story, but also how you work with and support athletes and all those surrounding athletes. Because I just think it just seems really interesting. You seem to do all of the cool bits.
Yeah, all the nice bits of the job. Yeah, spending time with people and helping them perform. Perfect. Good day.
Yeah, it is. It is. It is. I mean, I think that's great. And I suppose, for me as well, the whole reason why we're chatting and then doing what I'm doing is because I think I enjoy that too. The conversation you have, but also getting that sense of perhaps them taking something on board and the impact that it has on their performance, but then also on their lives as a whole.
Yeah, and being able to support them as humans, I think, is the bit that I enjoy most about
Oh,
my work. It's human to humans, right? And sometimes
yes.
we put these people on pedestals, and ultimately they're just people, and they need the same support, and they go through the same things as everybody else does. And that's the bit
Yeah.
I really connect with.
And so for those who don't know you, just give us that introduction, who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so I've been working in elite sport for about 20 years, although that's very telling of my age, unfortunately. But yeah, the last 10 years specifically, I've been working in kind of the wellbeing and coaching space. So working in Olympic and Commonwealth sports, essentially supporting athletes with an eye on them as whole people. So not
Yeah.
just what they put out on a court or on a mat or in a game, but very much them as a person. And well-being is a critical space essentially, and we've finally clocked onto, especially in the last 10 years or so, the fact that if we support people well as people, the chances are they'll perform better and for longer. Um, so I'm very fortunate to have been working in that space the last 10 years.
That's wonderful. I noticed you emphasized a lot on people and human. Um, has why? What's the emphasis on that? Was it not the same when you got into this space 10 years ago?
I think it's been developing. I think we were starting to go there. I think there's been a sophistication in the systems, and we've started to move from, I guess, this like it's just about winning, and everything we give a player, an athlete, is about getting them to the start line and winning essentially. To actually, can we do that well? Can we win well? Can we get them to the start line in a good shape, ready to perform at their
Yeah.
best, but also okay as people? So if we ask, how are you as a person, they could answer that positively as well. And I think that's something that we've like genuinely has been being unlocked in the last few years, and we're still building the understanding of, but there's so much opportunity in the space, I think.
Yeah, look, I certainly agree with you. And you talk about them being more than an athlete in some regards, or more than a cog in a on a whiteboard session of tactics, and you do this, get the ball here, they get that, and then off we go. It's not, you're seeing them as the whole individual. And I think what you're also saying, certainly things I've learned and experienced, is as if you treat it as an individual, as a whole person, you tend to be able to deliver more in the actual performance phase of what you're doing as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think it unlocks people's. I mean, listen, we all know as people, right? If we feel well, if things are going okay, if we feel well supported, the chances are we do better in a day-to-day basis. We perform in our own jobs, in our own roles. Like I said before, these guys are just humans. And actually, if they feel well and their well-being is being looked after, the chances of them performing is greatly heightened as it is for us. But also, I think there's a piece about performing well with longevity as well. So staying in a game for longer or being able to perform at your best for longer, and we know if we get some of these bits around well-being right, people will stay, but they'll also have positive experiences. And I think that's really
Mm-hmm.
critical. And you'll have heard as many stories as I have. People have come out and they've achieved amazing things, but actually, they're not in good places as humans, or their experience, they don't look upon it positively. And I think that's part of the shift that's happening in this well-being space as well. As in, it's not always going to be easy, but can they get to the end of their experience as athletes and have had overall a positive time and speak fondly of the
Mm.
sport, and not be a broken person at the end, but be a human that's ready to
Broken.
go on to the next thing.
Yes, I'm with you. Certainly not that, trying not to be that broken person, and readiness to go on to, that second wind, that next chapter in their life. Now, interesting, Helen, for you, you don't just work across one sport. In your history, you've worked across multiple sports and disciplines. Can you just talk about those different sports that you work through today and perhaps in the past?
Yeah. So my main, I guess, service provision at the minute is in netball. So all female team sports setting, which I've done a lot of over the years. But I've also been fortunate enough to work in kind of combat sport settings as well. Very much individual sports, mixed genders, different approaches, even different sort of age span of athlete as well. And depending on kind of where an athlete is at, they might need different types of support. So, for example, if you're moving a 17-year-old into a program, and it's the first time they leave their parents, it's a different type and level of support than a
Really
33-year-old
is.
netball player, who's moved
Mm.
before or kind of already is
Yeah.
married, set up in a partnership, those
Mm.
types of things. So different spectrum of support, but I think often boils down to the same couple of key principles, to be honest, which is support them, as people, creating a space for them to explore things, talk through things, take actions for themselves, empower
Right.
them a bit.
And those, I guess those things are core and consistent. I guess I've had the sense that they'll be consistent across the disciplines and across the genders and across countries as well. And I've always felt that. What's great, Helen, is you are living that. You know that because you've worked across all of those disciplines, individual, multi, team. I, and are those really the core principles, or do you actually feel, okay, in a female team versus a male team versus female individual or male individual athletes? Do you, to what extent do you have to treat them? And I say treat them differently, or at least, we talk about meeting them where they're at, meeting them
Yeah.
how they're ready. How different is it for you across the sports and to an extent gender?
Yeah. I think, listen, I truly believe the principles of support are really the same. And for me, they're underpinned by kind of coaching principles, which is um, essentially you're creating a space for these people to be their whole selves, whether they're a 17-year-old male or a 33-year-old female. You're working with them in partnership, regardless of kind of who they are, what age they bring, and you're helping them to, I guess, unlock their resourcefulness and take positive actions and be deliberate in some of the things they're doing. And so I think those principles like land across. And again, it comes back to they're humans and you work with them as humans, whichever country they come from, whichever gender they are, whichever sport they're in. But I do think there's nuance in that, absolutely. So I think, but the principle of nuance for me is about meeting them where that person is at as an individual. And part of the space that I work really hard to create with the athletes I work with is that, I'm not going to select you on a Saturday. I don't care if you throw a ball away. Like, I, you're the same person to me. I'll treat you in the same way. I'll meet you in the same place wherever you're at and whatever is going on for you at that time. And I think that can be quite a special space for people because um, athletes often don't have that really. Like somebody's always got something to say, or they're involved in their selection, or they're deciding what training they're doing the next day, or they're a parent who thinks all good, great things and wants to be super supportive, but unfortunately does have that kind of that judgment space, and comes at things with an angle. And I think the special space that we can create in these types of roles is that what you just I'll meet you like you said where you're at, but also I don't care if you got selected. I don't you know I don't like
That's why
it's not my
it gives them a
opinion.
safe space.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it gives them that where we, at least hopefully, as well-being. I think what you're describing there is it's important to give them a consistent, safe space for them to be able to come and be vulnerable, open up, or at least have someone they know is there and doesn't judge them because, well, whether you watch the game or not, you don't, it doesn't impact your relationship with them in any way.
Yeah, yeah. And I think testament to that is the work I currently do with a team in Melbourne. I'm not based in Australia, and so I do all that work remotely. And I think probably at the beginning, lots of people had lots of judgments on that and how would it work. But actually, what's nice is what I can truly do is create a space where I haven't formed a judgment on something somebody tells me before they share it with me. I haven't had six other opinions of it. I haven't seen it for myself. So if somebody comes in and says, "Oh, this happened today in the gym," I take it for what they tell me, as opposed to actually I've already formed my opinion of it. And I genuinely can create that space. I know enough about the program that they don't have to tell me every single detail, but I'm not in it. I haven't lived it with them. I haven't already formed an opinion. I can genuinely, and I've been in this role for 2 years now, and got some really positive working relationships with people.
Hi, I want to take this moment to thank Upskilled and their mini MBA for sponsoring this week's session. One of the great things about their mini MBA is it allows you to gain the skills and knowledge to help propel you that little bit further forward. It gets you understanding the vocabulary in the room and also gives you some of those skills to navigate the corporate career, the government career, or indeed stepping into not for profit. So, big thanks for Upskilled and the mini MBA for sponsoring this week. And hey, check it out. Link in the show notes. You can get $500 off.
Mm. Well, I mean that is in itself quite interesting. Working with a high performance team in fully remote, like you say, it's a couple of years. I was going to say, surely that wasn't happening before COVID. Surely we weren't comfortable doing that. But but it just shows how, like you say, how times have changed. And I guess kudos to you for creating that environment, and also to the team, to the high performance team, to recognize what's important is that you can create that space, and if you can facilitate that, then actually it can work.
Yeah, and in some ways it's a benefit because I'm not tussling for the same time of the athletes that everybody else is. They can speak to me on a car journey on the way home, in the morning, in the at a time when there isn't also an S&C coach trying to talk to them. The coach wants something from them. A teammate's expecting something, you know.
I know what that's like.
Yeah, 100%. You know, they're
Yeah,
busy old days, right? And there's lots of
yeah,
people that they have to communicate with, keep on side, do something for
yeah,
appearances here, you know, something for a sponsor there.
yeah.
And actually, I can truly sit in that space of like, they're sat at home with a cup of tea type thing. And we can do some
Hmm.
great work in those spaces.
That's right. Yeah, I like that. Well, look, Helen, I'm interested in your journey in sport. What your love for sport. How did that come about?
Yeah. Well, I was a gymnast myself, not massively high level, but loved it. And then I trained in the sports science degree because I was just so interested in human performance, essentially. It just fascinated me. And actually,
So I'm fascinated in human performance.
hmm,
I like the sound of that. What? Tell me what's the fascination? What's human performance, and what was fascinating about it?
I think in its real simplest form, I love biology, but I didn't really care what plants were up to. You know, I just the idea of like how are we here? Like how do we exist and how do we get the best out
Yes.
of
Yeah. Yeah.
ourselves, I guess.
Hmm.
And that's what sports science offered, right? It's the next step. It's the focusing on the human part of biology, I guess, for
Yeah.
me. Um, and yeah, it's always just fascinated me, mind and body. But actually, I focused in on the body stuff, and I was an exercise physiologist. And my first 10 years in elite sport
Yeah.
was as a sports scientist, you know, and so managing the data, taking the blood, do all those bits and pieces, and I loved it. And but I guess the piece I often played was doing this other piece, the people piece,
Mm.
alongside that role. And then as
So were you like the sports scientist who would be chatting to you at the same time and really think, so how's it going? And
Yeah,
whilst
and end up helping
doing
somebody
the
with a CV, or you know,
yeah.
I remember leaving. I was up in this working for the Scottish Institute of Sport, and one of the teams I worked heavily with was the judo team. They had a lot of the GB athletes up in Scotland at the time. I remember leaving and getting a lot of cards, and it was like somebody had written like "Thanks, Mum" at the end, you know, because of all that kind of emotional and moral support that you end up giving
Yeah.
people. And they were these kind of really heartfelt, like, you know, actually, it wasn't anything to do with the data or the, you know, how well they hydrated themselves. And that stuff was important. But for some reason, this other stuff kind of resonated with me more. And these well-being roles started to become more prevalent, and get much better funded in the UK system,
Hmm.
and hence the
And
move.
yeah. Well, I'm interested now because this is all about that finding that career clarity and sort of that shift. How did you make that leap? Because it is very different, that sports scientist, the exercise physiology, to being in well-being. How did you manage that?
Yeah, different and the same, if that makes sense. So the principles of working in kind of high performance sporting systems were the same. I guess I was fortunate in that I was making a move. I was making a move across the UK, from Scotland down to England, and that meant kind of leaving a role, not necessarily being sure what the next move was, and then the well-being, the role that I moved into came up, and I think the the bottom line of these well-being roles is being able to connect with humans, being able to ask great questions, offer good support, but also having that knowledge of kind of these elite performance settings meant I already had kind of half a foot in the
Yeah,
doors, I guess. I already got the challenges, and
yeah,
actually it made it a fairly easy transition. Um, and it's just, you know, it's not rocket science. A lot of it is people working with people. Um,
yes, yeah. And well, I guess on its simplest form, it is, and we've spoken about that. What's interesting about what you said is you were in that elite performance environment, which is the environment you wanted to be in. And the first half of that so far was the first 10 years was in that the sports science. That's the element that sort of really shone through. But then, even though you're in the right environment, you wanted a different role. And so you shifted roles. You moved from, well, as far as I can see, one side of the performance center to another side. And actually, one that's probably, thinking about it, is probably, we get less time on that side with the athletes. How does that feel from being the do the data, do the skin folds, doing all of those activities to, well-being, perhaps being an afterthought in that type, something that we must do because it looks good, it ticks the right box. Has that been a shift you've felt, or in fact, how have you felt that shift from being right in the heart of the performance to possibly being a tick box at
Mm.
some point?
Yeah, I think it's a really fair reflection, and definitely felt that at times during that move. However, I think I was really fortunate with the program that I went into, um, and they were going through quite a significant change at the time. And so they were changing a program from kind of not very professionalized, semi sort of centralized to centralizing a performance program, looking to pay athletes better, professionalizing the sport. And so the time I came in, they were going through such a big change that my ability to work with the head coach and the performance director at the time and really influence kind of how we placed this service from the start, um, was really critical, and grateful to them because they opened their arms up to it, but also just the sheer kind of nuance of when I arrived meant that this was the thing people needed, because actually it was really challenging. They had some kind of older players who it was like, oh, this doesn't feel like a good shift for me. And then there were some young guns who were like, count me in. I think our first player that had signed up had never been in, and it was England netball at the time, never been in an England program, and all of a sudden their hands are up, and then there's these older guys going, oh, I don't know, because I've got my life here, and I've got a partner and whatever else happening. And so actually, at that point, I was fortunate. It wasn't about data and numbers. It was about what do people need to be able to get on board and really commit into this program. And so, yeah, definitely at times I felt that. And I know it's a challenge across the system, that kind of tick box space. Um, and it's really unfortunate because I think the UK sports system is moving a little bit away from what has been gold standard, with a little bit of a change in funding and things. But um, I I've very fortunately been in right places at right times, and had people, and that is critical. It's the people who lead programs really seeing the value and buying into it, and I've been very fortunate with the people I've worked with, to be honest, across the way.
That's sometimes lucky, and I know that I've been in both in environments where, coming from a well-being or from a career perspective, I am welcomed and I'm seen as something really positive to support the athletes to look ahead. And I've been in camps where I'm perhaps not shunned, but not as welcomed in. Not, the door's not left open for me to come in and join a meeting and just be present in a positive environment, but often seen as no, come in only when needed, which I think at times can reduce the impact because it's then seen as a special case, and it's like no, just this is normal. We are humans. We all, from my perspective, continue to live after we've been athletes, or performing at that high performance level, and sometimes we need help to figure that out. So that it is difficult being pulled into different sides and having to adapt to still give the players and the athletes their best, or the best support you possibly can.
Yeah. And often it's not the players or the athletes who get to determine that level of input, right? It's somebody who runs a science and medicine meeting, or somebody who, the coach who kind of sees it as an add-on and, nice to have, but not in here. Um,
That's
and
right.
it's not actually often that they probably ask. either the wider
Mm.
group. And that's a really interesting thing for me, because one of the things that I try and do in all the programs I've been involved in is like review, debrief, like get the information and ask people like what's helping, what isn't, how are things going, like, and it sounds
Well,
simple, but often
yeah,
we don't.
but actually, you're coming from, I guess, coming from a science data background. You're probably, I'm guessing here, but you love data and working through it. So as a result, to what extent then do you track that performance? Do you capture data? Do you sort of, you've got vast experience. Do you see trends? Have you seen shifts in patterns through your measurement of information?
Yeah, listen, like I lean. It's difficult, right? It's a different space, so it's not as objective. You made a time, great, or this is your level, and we trust that, and so now you need to drink more or change this. It's much more subjective, but I still think it's really critical to measure both impact but also progression. And so, for example, in the program I work in now, we like 3 times a year we say, okay, let's debrief. How's this period gone? What worked, what didn't, what do we need to do differently? Some of it's to capture for next time we do pre-season. Some of it's to change, actually, you know what? Simple things as these massage slots just didn't work for us. We need to move them in the next block. Um, and then at least on a yearly basis, and that has a few levels, so it's like a group discussion and there's opportunity for individuals to feed in as well. And then at least on a yearly basis we run a kind of survey that does give us some objective data. It's subjective markers, but we get some objective numbers at the end of it. But it asks questions
Yeah.
like, how well do you feel supported as a person? How well do you feel supported in your performance? How well have we done communicating with you, and some of these elements. And what that allows us to do is say, average of 8 out of 10, for example. And what we've been able to see in the program I'm in now is that progression from, okay, yeah, you know what, the first year we got this bit a little bit wrong, but we've improved, we've increased. um and yes, it is subjective, but actually we know we're moving things in a positive direction. We know people are enjoying their experience. um it's almost a bit like, I can liken to it in business, they use net promoter scores, like how likely would you
Mm.
be to recommend this to a friend. It's almost like we do that check and challenge, like how likely are you to say we're doing a great job, and to say, the club I work at the minute, oh yeah, come and join this club, you know.
Okay.
um
Yeah, that's right. And it's interesting to get those kind of that information. Like you say, it's subjective, but it's still, if done consistently, it's an indicator. And it, like you say, it just lets you know where to focus or where not to focus. But as you did it, do you, is there anything that's sort of surprised you from these responses?
I think the big and interesting thing is that, I guess twofold really. People have personal experiences and their perceptions will always differ. Um, and if we approach something on a program level, we won't always make everybody happy. Sometimes a player will go through a season, for example, and they won't be first choice on a court, in which case, their experience will have been different to the person who was a shoe in every week to start and play a whole game. And so I think one of my big learnings is, it's not about tens across the board for everything. It's about making sure the experience overall is positive, or as positive as it can be for people. And when it isn't, interrogating the why. And sometimes those whys won't be in your control, selection, whatever else. And sometimes they will be, and they could be small things that we can change. Um, and the other thing, big reflection I've had, is that the program and the system needs to be ready to hear the data as well.
Mhm.
Because what
Tell me
tends,
more about
yeah, well, what tends to happen is, and we all do it, it's human nature. If we get some feedback, that relates to us, we start, the first thing we do is go to the negative and interrogate why that person said that thing, and it must be about us, right? Instead of standing back and going, you know what is this telling us overall? And this isn't a personal attack on us, for example, or the program. So if somebody rates the program really low, they're not saying, oh gosh, that general manager's awful, or that performance director's terrible, or, what they're saying is my experience here wasn't amazing. And it's being the hard bit when you collect data in these spaces is reminding people these aren't personal attacks. Let's
Mm.
focus on the why it might be there, as opposed to the, and listen, we all do it. Everybody will have
We
had
do.
360-degree feedback at some point and have gone, but who said this one thing that was awful, even if there were
Yeah.
10 brilliant things before it?
That's, yeah. And look, you're right. It is what we would probably we'd have to admit to doing more often than we would like to admit. I think in a sport environment, as much as feedback is done or provided on field and on court and things like that, I guess in that environment, it's probably quite different when it's received against either an athletic department
The
or
leaders.
in that well-being team that across that type of leadership, because we also may not have been trained on how to deal with feedback in that way. Like for me, on the football field, if I do a rubbish pass, they can tell me it was a rubbish pass, and it's like, yep, I know, I saw it. It's not done after the fact. They don't
Yeah.
write it down on a piece of paper. I received a rubbish pass. That was me. They're talking about me and that pass. We don't. It's not common in sport.
Yeah, no, it is different, and it's asking people to flex what they're used to receiving, right? And lots of the people in these athletic departments or in leadership in sport, they're sporting people, They've been measured and had instant feedback in the way you're talking about, but they haven't, nobody's ever said, oh, I don't really like the program you're running. And all of a sudden it's like, whoa, hang on, that really hits hard. Yeah, like
Yeah,
versus, oh, that was a not great pass. Um, yeah, it's a really interesting shift, but I think um, as systems get more sophisticated and we start to measure these things and we're trying to build things for the better, um, people have to get comfortable in those spaces, and the great coaches, the great leaders will be.
that's right. And look, and they certainly will be, and I think they need people like yourself operating and working, bringing your experience from other places in to help those particular athletes and demonstrating that a focus on well-being can support their performance. And we know empirically it can do that. And so I'm interested, Helen, in I guess some of your experiences working with athletes. And I know I focus very much here on the career side, or helping them figure out what they are more than a player. What's typically your approach to working with someone? We talk about this person, or treating them like a human. What typically is your approach to helping them? And I'm interested where you typically find that they struggle.
Mm. Yeah, really interesting. It's for me, it's a whole spectrum of support. So it could be supporting a player to have a challenging conversation with another player. That these other players done something that doesn't fit with our values, for example, and we need to hold them accountable. I could be spending time with them on that, to spending them time in a similar realm that you work. What does the next bit look like? What's the career path after this? To actually, they need to manage the fact that they weren't selected this week. To actually, there's a divorce going on at home, or there's some disruption, or there's a house move, and so, and for me, it can be a real spectrum of support, and that's where the core of the role comes to, for me, down to the coaching and asking good questions, providing a safe, confidential space, and actually just being, I guess, prepared to work with a bit of everything and anything. And of course you'll know this as well. The more you spend time in the space, the more you've got to know, oh, I've had that before. Here's how this worked last time, but it's not, for me, it's not about necessarily advising or telling somebody what to do. It's always about helping them find the right path or the right next move, right next step, however small that might be. Um, and I think those principles go across all those examples, right? But there really is a big spectrum. Even when the majority of my time at the minute is in one female sport. They're kind of 20 to 30 years old. In theory, it's not a big diverse population, but the spectrum of support requirements really can be quite
all
huge.
walks of life, all walks of life coming into that sport and that team, because it is, well, the beauty of, the sport is it just pulls people from everywhere. As long as they're good on the court, then they're in. So you get that diversity. How do you prepare for that? Right? You know it's going to be this broad spectrum. How do you get yourself ready to deal with that?
That's a really interesting question. I think for me personally, I just try and create the space for me to be truly present with people when I can. And if I can't be, I'm really honest as well, as in, I'm calling you back quickly. I've got 5 minutes. This is what you've got of me. Or, I can chat, but my kids are in the background or something else is happening. Um, and yeah, so there's a sense of kind of preparedness and being able to listen attentively and give somebody my attention, um, and creating some space before I go on a call with somebody or before I spend time with somebody often helps me. Like a quick 5 minutes, where am I at? What am I bringing today? Type thing as well. Often helps. Although working with the time zone difference with Australia, often that's like 6 a.m. So
Yes.
quite a cup of tea for 2 minutes before I jump straight on. Um, but then also I think it's about like being a bit forgiving of myself in a conversation as well. And I've got some, great relationships with players where I've even been able to ring them back after something and say, I didn't do great in that conversation with you. I'm really sorry. Like, let me go again.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah. Okay. And how has that been received?
Yeah, really well. Because listen, like I'll say again, we're all human, right? Sometimes we're not our best selves. Sometimes we don't manage conversations great. And people actually really appreciate vulnerability, right? People connect with other people when they're vulnerable. We know all this stuff. It's in the research and psychological safety and all this other great stuff, you know, and and actually, yeah, it's really hard to do as a person, but people respond really, really well if you just go, I'm really sorry. I, I, I really messed that conversation up with you, and I came from the wrong position, and I shouldn't have. Um, Let me try again. Actually tends to land, and we're all quite forgiving naturally, I think. um,
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially in these types of spaces, right? Where
Well,
ultimately,
yeah. I suppose we are. It's good. It's good. I'm actually thinking back to myself. Have I ever rated myself low enough in a conversation to then phone someone back and say, "Hey, I didn't do that well," and I'm now questioning myself, thinking, "Damn, I really should have done that at some point, because I couldn't have been great all the time. So what have I missed?" So I'm now gonna and I now have to reflect a little bit more after my conversations and think, what could I have been doing better
yeah,
there?
so fascinating.
Especially on a one.
Because sometimes I will just, the next time I speak to somebody, I'll just say, oh, maybe I didn't hit the right tone, or I'll go in with a slightly different, I'm going to tackle this a bit differently because the conversation didn't land, or really don't feel like I got the most out of it. But I've absolutely had times where I'm like, I can't wait for that next conversation. I've just I've done something like maybe gone into advice mode, or made
Through,
excuses for the other person, or in a conflict setting, or I've just not listened enough. Um, And yeah, there's definitely been a couple of occasions. I'm smiling because I can think of one specific one. Thankfully, she's very forgiving. So it's, and
Okay.
actually, it bolsters the relationship, right? From my perspective,
Yes.
it only makes.
Yeah, yeah, it
Relationships
does.
better.
You're quite right. It's funny. I can think of it in business contexts where a presentation or a talk or meeting or something hasn't gone well, and sort of coming back to that. Now, as I put myself in the this career context, I probably can't. In fact, interestingly, I can think of it when, as a on-field coach, and I look back at some of my very first sessions and just thought, "Oh my gosh, I just didn't see it." I had, them running around in a field that was 5 times too big or something along those lines, and I didn't recognize it. Um, but you've given me something new to think about as
Good.
I do my reflection. So thank you
Well, that
for bringing me a bit more another
my
perspective.
pleasure. My pleasure.
That's really good. So listen, so I'm interested then now. You know, because you've got a role, as you've said, is multidimensional. You're never quite sure what you're going to get when you pick up the phone or when you start speaking with an individual. When it comes to them and their career and thinking about what they're going to do, actually, what they're going to do after that elite level of sport, how do you typically approach that? And I guess thinking about the cohort who
Mm,
you're working with nowadays.
mm. Yeah. Listen, we make it a priority from day one. Is probably one of the simplest things I can say. So as soon as somebody joins our program, part of their first kind of screening conversation, I guess, is and what else? Who are you? Not as the netballer or not as the whatever sport it is. And because we start that conversation early, it just becomes a piece in the puzzle, right? So alongside, like, how does your week look? Where are you living? Like, what does home life look like? Those sorts of things. It's also like, and what is the plan? What's next? You're in education. Are you working alongside? What's the longer term piece? And we make that part of the everyday conversation, but we also build it into our programming as well. And so there
Mm,
is space built, and it's really deliberate. And it's like, here is a clear day off every week to go and do something that fills your bucket or gives you a different perspective. But if you can, let's make sure that aligns to something else you want to do, or something else you want to explore. And it doesn't necessarily need to be the thing you're going to end up in. Sometimes it's just about trying some other things. Or we've got a player at the minute who's leaning into beekeeping, and so I'm learning all sorts of
yeah.
things I've never learned before. But I think it's kind of making it a topic and then creating a space, because otherwise it's a token gesture. Otherwise we have a conversation about it, but we don't really give you the time to go and engage in learning, or the time to go into a business and explore, is this a career path you want? And so I think the crux for me is the two, right? It's the two.
Mm,
Here's the space. And so, for example, in our pre-season, we have a committed day off. It's always this day. You can go and do whatever it is kind of you want to do next. And we have teachers who are still kind of getting their hours up, so they're in schools. We have somebody that's going to help in an ICU kind of as a nursing assistant. Loads of perspective in that one. It's great. And then we have
yes.
people who are just joining, engaging in education, people who are going and trying out. Example, we've got a player who's interested in accountancy but doesn't know what stream of accountancy, so he's going and trying different spaces. Um,
Mhm.
and for me, that is just that's really important. I I am fortunate in the world that I work in netball in Australia that it's, well-being does have a good space. There's a lot of great stuff that's going on in the system as a whole in Australia, but specifically in netball as well. And it's just leaning into those spaces and then creating some opportunities for people.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, so Helen, we've spoken about what we do to engage with athletes and sort of creating that space. I'm going to ask you a different question at the end than I ask most people, and it's more for the athletes who perhaps have been forced to listen to this because they've been told you have to listen, you have to listen. But I guess I'm thinking for those athletes who are reluctant to engage with their well-being manager, or that the athlete liaison, what guidance would you give to them to convince them, hey, it's worth having the conversation with someone like yourself?
I think, to be honest, the first thing I would do is ask them a question. And I would get them to ask themselves why. Why aren't they engaging? What's stopping you? Um, I can make a lot of educated guesses, and a few backed up by research in terms of it. It could be that they don't see the need. It could be that there's a bit of fear in there. From personal experience, some of the avoidance has come when somebody doesn't know the what next, and actually, then what it means I'm doing is asking some really big questions that feel hard. And sometimes there's a bit of fear, and that leads to a bit of avoidance. But I think, yeah, my big thing would be ask yourself the why, and then also reminding, I guess, all athletes really that actually what a gift they have in terms of, it's not going to last forever, right? Most as normal folk go into careers in the hope that it is going to, right? Or not really knowing. But as an athlete, you're not going to be 80 and winning the 100 meters. It's just not going to, like, you might be masters level, but not in the normal space. Nobody's going to pay you to be an athlete at that age. So it's going to end. You've got this known. Um, and actually, that's kind of a gift for me because you go, along with that, you've got opportunity, support, and time, and not many people have that, right? If somebody is, early 30s, stuck in a career they hate and they want to make a change, like, where do they even start? They don't have the time to explore a change. They don't have somebody to talk that through with unless they pay through the nose for it, probably. They don't know where to start, and the guidance isn't there. Actually, it, athletes have a gift in that they do have some of that. They have the time to explore this unknown and the support to do it. And so I would say, lean in, lean in. Um, and even if you don't get your golden kind of career ticket at the end, what you do get is somebody, if they're great, who's concerned about you and you as the whole person. And even if you don't get that golden nugget of what's next in the career space fully ironed out, what you do get is a non-judgmental, supportive space. Um, and again, not many of us have that naturally either.
That's so true, Helen. So true. You talk about that gift, the gift of being both an athlete to, pursuing your dream to really compete at that level, but then also the gift of time and support. Right? People are here and on hand. And I like that question, why don't you want to talk to me? It's probably a, a good thing, just to pose. And I do here, I can echo some of those reasons as to why individuals may be uncomfortable, fearful, or avoiding, quite simply, to start asking themselves those difficult questions about life after the game, what that career looks like, and yeah, it can be that challenging path to get there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not easy. They're not necessarily easy conversations, especially if you don't
No.
know, right? If you've got an idea that you can, it can be easier. But if you
Yeah.
genuinely like, but
Genuinely don't know.
yeah,
You just don't know.
but then for me, then that, is actually where there's the greatest give, because there's somebody to start to work that through with.
Yeah.
And you have the time to explore, which again
Mhm.
is like you
Yeah.
could try six different things alongside your sporting career in just small little sections, but you might go in and go, you know what, I don't like employment law, it's awful, let me go to a different let me go and explore a different type of law, or
And it's okay.
you know
Yeah. And that's fine.
and
Yeah.
and again, as normal humans, don't get that,
Yeah.
we don't.
No, we don't. We typically don't, or at least it's harder for us to find the time to then make that shift. And I think that's the key thing. Well, look, Helen, I've just got to say thank you very much for coming on and sort of bringing your perspective to the show, to the listeners, and on everything that is sort of athlete well-being. I'm interested. People are going to be sort of watching this, wanting to get back in touch with you or follow your journey. What's the best place to follow you and or get in touch?
Yeah. So LinkedIn is probably the best place. Helen Alfano, PhD, on LinkedIn, and then through that you can get some of my other contact details and get in touch with me.
Yeah, wonderful. Listen, Helen, once again, thanks again for joining me.
No, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.